I call Holly Walker.
Chair, well, this is your favourite bill, no doubt, and mine, and one of the most interesting and unusual bills I've had to deal with in my short time in this House. The Green Party does oppose the Plumbers, Gasfitters and Drainlayers Amendment Bill, and will continue to do so in this committee stage, and that's for a number of reasons, but probably actually chief amongst those is the incredibly poor process that has been followed with this bill. And I thought I'd begin my contribution by outlining briefly just what that process has been. Because it was introduced in March, as we know, with an incredibly short select committee consideration period, initially of just 1 week, later extended to 2 weeks, but still an incredibly short period of time. And that was due to the apparently urgent need to pass this legislation before the 1st of April, apparently. Very urgent. Before the 1st of April, we needed to pass this legislation. Well, I know that the dates on the walls here are slightly behind today, but they still say the 2nd of July, Mr. Chair. And the 1st of April was quite a long time ago, and yet here we are in the House, only at the committee stage of the bill, yet having done quite heroic efforts, I think, in the Government Administration Committee to consider this bill in an incredibly short period of time due to the apparent urgency. Due to that constrained period of time, many submitters were unable to be heard. Many had to have their submissions recorded as correspondence rather than submissions because they received after the closing date. They had very little notification of the time available in which to make those submissions. And given that we know, in part, what has given rise to the need for this bill is a large amount of dissatisfaction in the plumbing and gas fitting and drain laying sector, the incredibly short process that was applied to the Select Committee and the fact that many individual stakeholders who felt that they had a very strong interest in this weren't able to make submissions and had very little notice of the bill coming up in the House will have only added to that high level of dissatisfaction in the sector. And as we've said, to add insult to that injury, despite the rush and the Select Committee reporting back in time, that deadline of the 1st of April came and went with no change, and the bill has been languishing for months since its second reading. It's now July and we're finally having the committee stage, and despite the fact that we are sitting under urgency, clearly no urgency has actually been accorded to this bill in terms of the priority given to it by the government after that initial panic of its introduction and short process. So clearly, it could have had months longer at the Select Committee, it could have had a proper period of scrutiny, it could have had a proper period of submissions, and we could be back here right now in a much different position, Mr. Chair. And I want to acknowledge at this point the pressure that such shortened Select Committee periods place not only on submitters and members of the public, but on the Select Committee staff, on the Parliamentary Council Office drafters and on the officials who advise the committee, because it's not actually really the members of the committee who suffer the most, although we often go to considerable efforts to make sure we've read all of the submissions in a short period of time, but it's the staff and the advisors who quietly get on with it and bust a gut behind the scenes to meet these urgent deadlines. And in this case, it appears that it was all completely unnecessary because here we are months later with absolutely no priority having been given to the bill since then. So those are the procedural reasons for our opposition to this bill. In terms of the substantive reasons for our opposition, it's very clear, and it comes down really to the point that retrospective legislation should be extremely rare in this House, and when it occurs it should be subject to a very high bar, and it is not clear at all in this case that that bar has been met. Now, as we know, this bill retrospectively validates fees and levies that have been collected in what turns out to be an unlawful manner since 2006 by the Plumbers, Gasfitters and Drainlayers Board. And this unlawful practice has been the subject of complaints to every available adjudicator. It's been to the Regulations Review Committee, it's been to the Ombudsman, it's been to the Auditor General, it's been back to the Regulations Review Committee, and in every case those complaints were upheld. They were rightful complaints, they had a right to take them, and the adjudicators in every case upheld those complaints. And so there is a real issue of natural justice when, after having someone's complaint upheld by every channel available, Parliament simply legislates to make it go away. and they say, there is a problem there. Congratulations for taking this complaint, Mr. Chair. And thank you for bringing it out to our attention. We are now going to retrospectively validate this unlawful conduct so that your complaint will go away. And that is not acceptable. It's unfair and it shouldn't be happening in this case. Now, even if the Plumbers, Gasfitters and Drainlayers Board believed, and I believe this is them to be frank and honest when they say they believe they were acting lawfully, but believing one is acting lawfully is not the same as acting lawfully. And much in the same way as we are seeing at the moment with the GCSB, believing one is acting lawfully doesn't make it so. And it's offensive to the rule of law for Parliament to come in and say effectively, well, we have to make the law catch up with the practice. And it shouldn't be done lightly, Mr. Chair, and we think it is being done lightly in this case. Now, we do agree, and this is where we do agree with parts of the bill, that there is a need for legislation to validate the collection of the offences fee by the Plumbers, Gasfitters and Drainlayers Board in the future, because we agree that the board should be able to prosecute non-licensed practitioners when complaints about them are received. And indeed, we think it's in the interest of the whole industry to ensure that that can happen, to ensure that the so-called cowboys are regulated. It has negative consequences for all plumbers and gasfitters when those unregistered, unlicensed practitioners bring their industry into disrepute. And it's a logical, natural thing that the board should be able to prosecute those complaints. So we could absolutely support legislation of this nature if it applied only in the future to how the board collects levies and how it prosecutes complaints in the future. But we can't support its retrospective application. Now, the reason we have been given that it's so important to apply this law retrospectively is that if the board was required to pay back the unlawfully collected levies and fees, it might be left bankrupt. And we can agree that it's not a desirable outcome, obviously, for that to happen. But our question is, why shouldn't the government provide the board with some financial support to ensure that this doesn't happen? Because after all, it was poorly drafted legislation in 2006 that led to this problem in the first place, that created the situation where the board thought they were acting lawfully and it turned out that they weren't. And so surely there is some responsibility on the part of the government, of the Crown, to help put that right, including by making a financial contribution to ensure that if the board was required to pay back those fees and levies, that there would be some financial support from the government to enable them to do that without falling over financially. And the best estimate that we were able to obtain at the Select Committee was that we might be talking in the vicinity of $1 million in order to do that. Now, I know $1 million is a lot of money, but in the scheme of the government coffers, it's hardly going to break the bank, Mr. Chair, and it seems like a perfectly reasonable thing to do. It seems like a perfectly reasonable thing to do in this situation, given that it was a government error in the first place, that the Crown should help with some of the financial liability if indeed those fees and levies need to be paid back. So those are the substantive reasons why the Green Party continues to oppose this bill. And we have both procedural and substantive reasons for doing so. Now, the House is in quite an interesting position, Mr. Chair, because we have a Select Committee report where the Select Committee was unable to agree whether the bill should pass, and that I think is indicative of what a mess this whole process has been around this bill. Now, there was one substantive amendment that the committee could agree to, and that was an amendment to Clause 5 to insert new subsection 171B. To make it B2, to make it clear that while the board could continue to collect the offences fee in future, it couldn't change the fee. And in order to change the fee, it would need to replace the fee with an appropriate disciplinary and prosecution levy imposed under Section 143. And this change, I think, speaks to the need to get the process right for the future collection of fees and levy, and that's why the Green Party can support that one technical amendment to the bill. But we can't support the bill as a whole because of its retrospective nature, and we will continue to oppose in these committee stages and in the third reading, Mr. Chair, because of both the process and the substance of this rather interesting bill. Tēnā koe.
The Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm really pleased to be able to contribute in the committee stages of the Plumbers, Gasfitters and Drainlayers Amendment Bill.